downtown Raleigh. It's Science Tonight. Now here's your host, Chris Smith.
Hey everybody, good evening and welcome to Science Tonight. I am your host, Chris Smith from the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Hey, thanks for being here. Thanks for tuning in to the program tonight. We've got a great show set up for you because we have a great show every Thursday at 7 o'clock because we're talking about everybody's favorite thing every single week, science and nature. That's what we do here at this program. Makes sense. We're Natural Sciences Museum. That's kind of the thing that we like to do. But I'm glad that you're here for tonight's program also. We're going to be talking with Dr. Kelly Speer about everybody's favorite animals. We're going to be talking about parasites. That's right. I know you love to love them. Dr. Kelly Speer is a postdoctoral fellow at the Smithsonian, the National Museum of Natural History. That's right, the big one in Washington, D.C. I believe the largest natural history museum, at least in the Western Hemisphere, certainly in the United States. And she's also jointly appointed at the National Zoo. Dr. Speer, welcome to Science Tonight.
Thank you very much for having me, Chris. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad that you could be here on the show with us. I understand you are an expert in all things parasites.
That's right. Well, at least some parasites.
At least some. So is the right term parasitologist?
Yeah, you can call me a parasitologist.
There we go. Hey, everybody, we've got a parasitologist on the show. This is going to be a fun one because, listen, we're not just going to be talking about parasites like weird things that they do or necessarily bad things that parasites do, if a parasite can actually do something bad, ecologically speaking. But the title for tonight's program is Saving Parasites. So everybody, you're going to have to stay tuned in for the whole program because we're going to talk about parasites and we're going to talk about reasons that you should care about them. At least I'm assuming, should we care about them? I don't want to bury them.
You most definitely should.
We most definitely should. So we're going to jump into the serious science in just a moment, everybody. But first, Dr. Speer, I have a game of trivia for you to play.
Okay.
Sound all right?
Yeah, I'm game.
Now, you're game. Fantastic. So what I've done, you're an expert on parasites. So I have 3 questions about a particular type of parasite taking advantage of a host. People who won't leave a party.
Oh, okay. That's a different type of parasite, but maybe there's some crossover.
Okay, we'll see. We'll find out right now the similarities and differences between your study subjects and people who won't leave a party. Okay, which of these does etiquette writer Lizzie Post of the Emily Post Etiquette Institute suggest you do to wrap up a party? At the beginning, hand out paper itineraries at the door. Pretend you have a phone call with news, or say thank you and then show them the door.
Maybe C? Say thank you and show them the door.
That is correct.
Yay!
Excellent job. Yeah, just say, hey, everybody, this was great. You can leave now. Is it that easy to get rid of a parasite?
Not
your
quite.
Parasite? Not just thanks for being here. You can go now. Okay. That's 1 out of 3. Of course, 2 out of 3, we put you in the Science Tonight Hall of Fame. Your next question, which old restaurant trick can you use to end the evening? Hand everybody a bill for what they ate and drank at the party. Stop refilling everybody's drinks, or proclaim loudly, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
I think B, stop refilling everyone's glasses.
Of course. Makes sense, right? Just hide the drinks, even the water and sodas, or leave the water and soda out for a little bit longer, but then everything, put it away, and people will get bored of not having anything to sip on and they'll leave on their own. Have you ever heard of parasites just leaving on their own? I guess if
Sometimes,
the resources dry up,
yeah,
then the
and some
parasite's going to take
parasites,
out.
yeah, or they just move on to a different life stage.
Oh,
Things.
okay. Bookmark that one. We're going to come back to that one. Okay. Okay. So that's 2 out of 3. You've won our game, but here comes the third one. Let's see if you can get 100% on the quiz. Which of these celebrity techniques could you imitate to signal the end of the party? Jump through a hoop made of laurel leaves, like Igor Stravinsky. Don't ever stop the party, like the Kardashians, or burn down the place, like a YouTube star.
B, don't stop the party.
B, just don't ever stop the party. The parties do unfortunately eventually end and everybody goes home. No, the correct answer is jump through the hoop made of laurel.
Oh, well, I learned something on this show today.
Yeah, one of the most famous celebrity parties ended when Igor Stravinsky, famous composer, leapt through like a circus trick. And that was, yay, end of the party.
Wow, maybe I should give that a try sometime.
Just get a big hoop. Like, all right, everybody, this is it. By the time I hit the ground on the other side, you have to be out the door. Well, okay, so this is interesting. You get 2 out of 3. Fantastic job. We'll put you into the Science Tonight Hall of Fame.
Thank you.
And now that we all know how to get out of a party and not be a parasite, let's learn a little bit about what it does mean to be a parasite. So let's get started with science. Give us all an idea of what it is exactly that you study and what you do.
Yeah, I study parasites, as you might have guessed. I specifically study how environmental changes like habitat change or climate change impact the interactions between mammals, their parasites, and the microbes that are associated with both the mammals and parasites. I specifically focus on bats and their blood-feeding parasites called bat flies. And bat flies carry these really interesting bacteria that can help protect them against invading pathogens. And so this impacts their ability to transmit pathogens to their bat host. So I'm interested in this like 3-level interaction between mammals, parasites, and microbes.
Mammals, parasites, and microbes. Okay, so we're not just talking about the parasites, the bloodsuckers themselves.
No, yeah, I am going a little bit deeper than that. And interestingly, we know that sometimes the interactions between a host and a parasite can be governed by the microbes associated with those organisms. That means even though it can seem like a mammal and a parasite co-evolved with each other for millions of years, that interaction is actually mediated by bacteria or viruses or fungi that enable them to coexist so well together. So that's why microbes are important in this system.
Okay, interesting stuff. So then how do you define a parasite? Because I think of wormy things or intestinal bugs or bacteria, right? If people have pets, then they might probably think about things like tapeworms or pinworms, right? That's what comes to mind when I think of what a parasite is.
Yeah, all of those things can be parasites. There are a lot of different definitions of parasites. Most of them are like semantic that scientists get into like really like intense arguments over the very fine wording of these definitions. But overall, you can think of a parasite as an organism that relies on another species of organism for resources. Those resources can be nutrients. So like the tapeworm that you were talking about, they rely on the nutrients they receive from their host's gut. in order to survive. Other parasites rely on their hosts for things like child rearing. So the resource that a parasite relies on can vary, but you can just think of it in terms of any organism that relies on another for these resources. And because they take resources from a host, they are to varying degrees detrimental to that host.
To varying degrees. So parasites defined that way could be just an enormous collection of the animal kingdom then.
They are actually
And
an
plant
enormous.
kingdom.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. They are actually a huge portion of life on Earth. Because if you think about it, every animal and every plant has parasites associated with it. And sometimes those parasites can be unique to a specific species of animal or plant. So when you think about it like that, the number of parasite species might be equal to or even greater than the number of non-parasitic species.
Oh, wow. Just as many and maybe more.
Yeah, possibly. We actually don't know yet.
We don't know. Do we have an idea that, like, do we assume that it's kind of a 50-50 split between things that use resources from other living things?
There's competing hypotheses. So it depends on how much you expect parasites more generalized. Then that means that they can occupy many different types of host species. In that case, the number of parasite species would be lower than the normal of non-parasitic species. So all of this is based on conjecture at this point because we simply don't know enough about the biodiversity of parasitic life.
We simply don't know enough. That's really impressive and interesting. So in that case, you're out here generating knowledge for us about parasites by studying them. So how do you study parasites?
Yeah, that's a great question. The specifics of how I do my project are pretty mundane. I go to the I go to the field, which is typically jungle habitat in neotropical areas. One of the places that I normally go. Yeah.
Wait, it's mundane to go visit tropical jungles? It's not what I do in my day job, Dr. Speer.
Yeah, you're right. It's good to have perspective.
I guess if you're in the tropical jungle every day.
Well, yeah. If only I were so lucky. So I go to these jungles. Since the parasites that I study are found on bats, I have to be a mammalogist also. So I use specialized nets to catch bats either flying around the forest or when they're roosting in caves. And I use tweezers essentially to pick these parasites, which are flies and ticks, off of the skin of the bat. I take them back to the lab. I use microscopes to identify them, and I use genetics to learn more about the microscopic organisms within the parasites. But I'm not sure, were you asking me about those types of specifics, or were you hoping for a more broad answer?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm just curious about sort of the knowledge that you're generating about parasites. What are you learning and how do you learn about them? So it sounds like you collect them, you're measuring them, you're looking at their DNA. What does this tell us about the ticks that live on bats, or tell us about these communities of species?
Well, what I've found out so far, and this is building upon lots of other work in different groups of parasites by other parasitologists, is that the environment seems to matter in terms of the community of hosts that occur in a place, the community of parasites that occur in a place, and to some degree, the community of microbes that occur in a place. So that means that habitat change caused by climate change or through deforestation have big implications for the occurrence of hosts and parasites in any landscape. The research that I'm doing is specifically looking at how those changes, what consequences those changes have for the conservation of parasites in their hosts. And it's still ongoing research, but what I know now is that when habitats are disturbed, the communities of bats and bat flies and ticks change a lot. You can measure the response of those organisms as forest becomes smaller and further away from other patches of forest.
So then, well, let me back up. What does a bat tick look like?
Well,
do they look like the ticks that I'm familiar with, like after a hike here in the South, where we have plenty of them?
Kind of, yeah. So bat ticks are really interesting because they're a completely different family of tick than the one that you probably find on your socks after you go for a hike. They, unlike the ones that you find on your socks, they only have to feed every few years. And so most of the time you don't find a lot of ticks on bats. You typically find them within the caves that bats roost in. And they tend to be, they're like a weird gray color,
Okay.
but they're about the same size as an adult tick, so pretty big relative to maybe what you've seen before. So,
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, how big are the bats you're working with? And if the ticks on them are the same ones that I pull off,
yeah,
that's a big blood-sucking creature hanging on to a bat.
yeah, it's really surprising, but it doesn't seem to cause the bats. There's not any measurable, they don't seem sick when they have ticks or flies on them. The bats don't seem sick. So the resources that the ticks and the flies are taking from the bat when they feed on the blood of the bat doesn't seem to be so detrimental that it causes a noticeable illness or slowness in the bat.
Oh, okay. Well, that's nice for the bat then, I guess.
Yeah, that's actually pretty common for a lot of parasites where even though they do take resources from their hosts, sometimes we're unable to detect the effects of those missing resources.
Okay, so that kind of flies against what I guess we would say popular culture or sort of the general information that's out there about parasites. We think of parasites as like being very detrimental. They have this sort of really negative connotation associated with them, but you're saying it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, I think that that's really common because most people don't learn a lot about parasites in school. So typically what people have heard about parasites are in relation to the ones that can make people sick or hurt human well-being by affecting livestock, domestic animals, or crops. And don't get me wrong, parasitologists are not advocating for conserving those species of parasites. If it hurts human health or well-being, then we're not trying to save it. For parasites like the guinea worm that cause a lot of human suffering, I have no scientific or personal qualms about that species of parasite going extinct. But those parasites, the ones that hurt human health or well-being, those are actually a really small number of total parasite biodiversity. Of the number of parasites that we have described today, those parasites actually only comprise less than 4% of total parasite biodiversity. So the other 96% of parasites that we know about have nothing to do with humans, livestock, domestic animals, or crops. And those parasites can actually have a really big positive impact on their community, which is surprising given they rely on a host for nutrition.
Okay, positive impacts of parasites.
Yeah, that's right.
What are some examples of positive impacts from parasites?
Yeah, well, so parasites do a lot of good in their community and their ecosystem at many different levels. So, one example is that when parasites infect a host and they do have a measurable impact on that host, they can make the host easier for predators to consume. So, for example, um, crickets have these parasitic worms called horsehair worms, and these worms control the behavior of their cricket host and convince the cricket host to jump into freshwater streams and lakes. Um,
Oh, wow.
which is, yeah, it's not great for the cricket, but that's what the parasite needs in order to continue its life cycle. But the cricket throwing itself into the water is actually really great for fish. It creates this really, it helps nutrients flow downstream to the fish who eat the crickets that throw themselves into the water. Um, Parasites can also help improve primary producer communities. So primary producers are things like plants. So it's if you think about marine snails that consume algae, algae is a really important primary producer for marine invertebrates, small fish, crabs, things like that. But these snails can have populations that get out of control and they consume all of the algae available in an area. But when there are parasites present in these snails, causing the snails to be eaten by birds or die, that helps control their populations, leaving more algae for other species in the ecosystem. So even though these parasites might negatively impact their individual hosts, they have an overall positive impact in their ecosystem. And even more weird is that sometimes parasites can even have a positive impact on their individual host, which seems totally counterintuitive to what we understand about parasites.
Right.
Like,
Does that make it a parasite?
well, yeah, because a parasite still takes something from their host, but they may give back in other
Ah,
ways. So, for example, in Yellowstone wolves that were reintroduced, they were grown in captivity or grown, they were raised in captivity and they didn't have any parasites. So they had these naive immune systems. So when they were actually released back into the wild, they were really susceptible to a lot of pathogens and very harmful parasites that other things like foxes and coyotes that lived in the same region were not as susceptible to, because they had this native biome of parasites that were actually protecting them from certain pathogens. So in some ways, parasites might protect their host by training their immune system to respond to parasites and by competing with the invasion of more harmful parasites to that host.
okay. Well, that you explain it and it makes a lot of sense. It's like all things in balance
Yeah,
in
that's
nature, things
exactly
get
it.
really out of balance. And so how does your research on the microbiome uh, play and fit in?
Yeah, so the microbiome is really interesting because some bacteria can be beneficial to an insect parasite. So, for example, bat flies that I study, they can transmit a bat specific malaria to their host bats. But when some types of bacteria are present in their gut, they actually become worse at transmitting that malaria parasite to their host bat. When those bacteria are absent, they become better at transmitting that pathogen to their bat host. So the interactions between parasites and microbes can impact their ability to transmit pathogens to their host. It's like a whole nother layer of competitive interactions happening within the parasite.
Oh yeah, wow. Very interesting stuff. And so how does all of this then, the pathogens, the microbiome, the parasites, the hosts, when you're talking about saving and doing conservation work for parasites, does that just mean we need to protect or restore habitat for the bats? Or are these parasite specific recommendations for protecting species?
Well, it's both. So the good news is that the work that we do to help conserve habitat for free-living species also helps parasites. Because parasites rely on these free-living species as their hosts, the more hosts there are, the better it is for the parasites. So conservation of charismatic animals, like mammals, pandas, polar bears, that type of thing, that actually helps parasites too. But on top of that, parasites are uniquely susceptible to the effects of climate change because they often have these complex multi-host life cycles. So there's a lot of places along the chain of their life cycle that make them vulnerable to habitat loss and a warming climate. In fact, based on estimates of climate change, we expect that 30% of parasitic worms will be extinct by 2070, simply because of the effects of climate, not even including the effects of host extinction. If we take a step back and look at global parasite biodiversity, not a specific group of parasites, it's estimated that between 5 and 10% of all parasites will go extinct by 2070 due to the combined impacts of host extinction and climate change.
Say that again. How many parasites could be extinct in 50 years?
Up to 10% of parasites. And that's
So
similar.
10% of parasites, and parasites could make up nearly half of life that we know of.
Yeah, and it's an extremely big representation of life on Earth that could be condemned to extinction without conservation focus.
Okay, wow. Okay, so okay, the picture's starting to come together then. These parasites and their hosts and the microbiome, there's all these intricate interactions. And I mean, I would guess it wouldn't even have to be big changes in things like climate to actually be pretty detrimental to this ecological system.
Yeah, you're right. Things, even changes that seem small to us, can have really big amplifying consequences when you look further downstream. I find it helpful to think about this in terms of playing a game of Jenga. You're gradually removing these pieces, and in the case of parasites, because we know so little about their biodiversity, we are often removing a piece without knowing the importance of that piece in its ecosystem. And sometimes when that piece, is lost due to extinction, we didn't even know it existed before it went extinct. So you're pulling these pieces out of the Jenga tower without knowing how they fit into their broader community. And so without knowing it, you can lose a piece that causes the whole tower to crumble simply because we didn't take the time to study it. We didn't take the time to protect it.
Do you know of any particular parasites that you would say are on the brink right now?
We do know that parasites with complex life cycles, so that means parasites that have to go through multiple different hosts, tend to be more vulnerable, or we expect them to be more vulnerable to extinction. So things like ticks, any ectoparasite really, we expect to be vulnerable to extinction. Parasitic worms are also parasites that have complex life cycles generally. And so we expect those to also be more susceptible to extinction. But I'm not able, the unfortunate thing is for free-living species, we have this thing called the Red List that is a group of experts on certain species, and they review all of the literature about the stability of the populations within that species and globally how the species is doing overall. And that group assigns a risk factor that says, okay, this is least concern all the way up to critically endangered. But so far, the only parasite species that have been examined with that thorough of a combing over have been parasites that are only parasitic during a small portion of their life cycle and are actually free living during the rest of it. For example, freshwater mussels uh, are actually parasitic in their larval stage, and those have been listed as critically endangered according to the IUCN Red List. Another one is a type of butterfly that is parasitic during a portion of its life cycle. So those are the only two parasites that have been examined for how critically they are endangered. That's one of the biggest priorities that parasitologists are focusing on now, is trying to get more parasite species examined by IUCN so that they can be listed, or we can identify them as least concern.
Wow. Two little groups.
Yeah.
A few mussels, and you said butterflies?
Yeah, yeah.
A type of butterfly? Okay. Wow. So there really is a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, there really is.
So in that case, is it listing? I mean, I guess it's research first. And then do things like, would we expect to see parasites showing up on the endangered species lists?
Well, we hope so.
What are the protections that go into place?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I hope to see more parasites listed on the endangered species list, given they do benefit the communities they occupy. But there's a lot of steps that have to come before that. A lot of it is, you're right, research, just going out and describing the parasites that are there and finding out how they work within the communities they operate within. The other part is getting more people on our side. Like you mentioned before, I think a lot of folks have an immediate negative reaction to parasites. And so having people come to talks like this and maybe changing their mind about parasites, or at least getting a more nuanced perspective about them, and then telling their friends, the more we get the word out that parasites are worth saving, they actually do some good, and they're facing some dire critical consequences in the near future if we don't focus on them a little more. I think the more people saying those things, the better off we're going to be. And there are lots of opportunities for people to get involved with parasite research through community science projects. So if you're interested in that, I recommend just looking up on the internet community science projects and parasitology in your neighborhood. A lot of these are operated through natural history collections that have a parasite collection. So yeah, there's lots of ways to get involved.
What do we call it? Citizen science.
Citizen science, yeah.
Everybody can get involved. Do you know of any particular projects that are going on, citizen science projects, or other ways that people interested in this kind of stuff could further their interest?
Yeah, so one of the biggest efforts going on right now, so in natural history collections, as I'm sure you know, Chris, there's a lot of specimens that just haven't been cataloged yet. And cataloged means the information that's recorded on the label associated with that specimen hasn't been entered into a computer so that it can be shared with the public, with other scientists, with people who want to work on them. There's just so many specimens in museums and not enough people working on them. So one of the big citizen science projects going on right now is through the University of Utah, which has a really huge parasite collection. And you can volunteer as a citizen scientist to transcribe the information that's associated with a parasite label into a computer database so that it can be broadly accessed by any scientist in the world, any person in the world who wanted to look it up. So that's through University of Utah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, but honestly, if you reached out to any parasite collection, I can guarantee that they would have uncatalogued specimens and would be over the moon if someone wanted to volunteer to help them catalog those. So that's, yeah, just reaching out to your natural history collection and asking how you can volunteer is a great way to get involved.
Yeah, I know at the Museum of Natural Sciences, we have something like 4.5 million cataloged specimens. But when I talk to some of our research curators and collections managers, they talk about, they pull out a specimen from a jar and there's what's on the label, but then they're pretty sure there's probably a lot more things that were living on that thing that are not, they're not even on the information label. And so
Absolutely.
natural history collections are probably just full of parasite specimens that got collected with the original.
Yeah, you're
And
absolutely
just
right.
so much to be done. So many specimens.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. And there are opportunities through natural history collections to do things like comb mammal skins for lice that were co-collected by accident with that mammal. Um, Volunteering with natural history collections will definitely lead you down a rabbit hole of very interesting experiences.
All right. Well, everybody, I'm going to remind you, if you're watching, you can use the chat box over there on the YouTubes to type in your thoughts, your questions for Dr. Speer. And in just a moment, I'm going to grab those and pose those. But I have one more question for you, and then we'll roll into the audience Q&A. What are some of your favorite parasites?
Oh man, okay, this is a great question. I have a lot.
Okay, perfect. I want to know about them. I'm going to take notes.
Well, one of my favorite is the brown-headed cowbird, which is actually really common in the United States. This bird is actually a brood parasite. So the female birds find a nest of another bird species. They remove the eggs of that bird species and lay their own eggs in the nest. They've adapted so that the shell of their eggs mimics the shell of the host that they're like removing the eggs of that host from the nest. So the host bird comes back, doesn't notice anything different, sits on the eggs of the brown-headed cowbird bird eggs, rears them. And the weirdest thing is that these host birds, even after the brown-headed cowbird chicks hatch and don't look anything like the host bird can't tell. So this bird feeds these chicks and raises them, and the brown-headed cowbird is often bigger than the host bird. So it's just these a really odd I like that story a lot. I also am very partial to these flies called ked flies that are common also in the United States, but they're globally distributed. Some of these flies, ked flies, Ked.
Okay.
They're also sometimes called flat flies because they have like a flattened body. But some of these species are only found on mammals like camels, deer, horses. Others of them are only ever found on birds. But the ones that are found on deer have this really weird life history trait where when they fly around, they have wings, but when they get onto a deer, they tear their own wings off of their body. So in a museum, you can tell which ones have made it to a deer and which ones haven't, because the ones that haven't made it to a deer still have their wings, and the ones that have just have these like gnarled stubs for wings.
Oh my gosh. But wait, being able to fly is such a great thing, right?
Yeah.
Why would you just rip them off?
If you ask a
Awesome.
ked fly, they'll tell you no.
I don't need these anymore.
Yeah, they're like, I've made it. I'm not going anywhere.
Found a spot. Gonna live the good life now.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, ked flies. All right, I'm gonna have to look these up now.
Very odd.
I'm gonna have to find some photos of gnarled ked flies who are living the dream.
Yes, yeah. They found their paradise. They're happy where they are.
Okay, let me turn to our audience here. Let me see what these folks are thinking about, because they've got questions too, and I want to make sure we've got time for all of them. So the first one that popped up here, we kind of sort of asked this one, could you have a parasite that helps the host?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when parasites can help train their host's immune system. having a parasite there can actually make the host better prepared to defend itself against future pathogens or other parasites.
Excellent stuff. Now, Glenn's got an interesting question here. Do parasites have parasites? And how long of a chain can you get of parasites?
Oh, Glenn, I am so glad you asked this. Yeah, so actually, one of the bats that I study is the vampire bat, which only feeds on blood. That bat also has parasites. So we have the vampire bat, we have the blood-feeding flies that live on the vampire bat, and then on those blood-feeding flies, there can be things like mites that feed on the hemolymph of the fly. There can be fungal parasites that like invade the exoskeleton of the fly. I guess if we went the mite route, there could potentially be parasites of the mite. So we're talking about 4 levels of parasitism here. This is like hyperparasitism.
I guess a pathogen isn't considered a parasite.
Well,
So
it gets a little.
you couldn't even like drag it on out.
Well, it gets a little trickier with the microscopic stuff. When you start thinking about, malarial parasites, those are eukaryotes. So are they a parasite or are they a pathogen? It kind of depends on the definition you're using.
Got it. All right, let's see here. Do certain bats protest you holding them and picking off their bat flies and ticks, or do some enjoy the process? And can you share an interesting bat encounter you remember from the field?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, actually, some bat species do not enjoy going to the bat fly spa and having all their bat flies removed because, I have a headlight on, I'm shining it in their eyes. I try and minimize, of course, like how much time I'm handling them because it is stressful for them and I don't want to hurt them. But other species do seem to oddly enjoy it. There is a species of fruit and nectar feeding bat. It's called Sternira lilium. That's the scientific name for it. And I actually don't know the common name, but this bat is very strange because it has these kind of shoulder pads that emit like a hormone that actually smells like peppermint to me, but to other, it smells kind of different depending on who you are and who smells it. So those bats, when I blow on the fur to find the bat flies, they enjoy it. Yeah, but a good field story. I have a particularly memorable field story involving vampire bats.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so one of the places that I frequently go to in the field is this wonderful place in Belize that has these unexcavated Mayan temples. So the Maya were really advanced in the stones that they were able to mine from the earth. And so a lot of these valuable stones and gems are accumulated within these unexcavated temples. So looters have gone and dug tunnels into the center of these temples so that they could get at these stones. But these looters' tunnels actually make fantastic bat caves. So vampire bats are roosting in these looters' tunnels. And I go in there looking for bat ticks because remember, bat ticks are often found in bat roosts rather than on the bats themselves. So while I'm looking in there, I think I see something, but it's way above my head height. So I ask a teammate of mine if he can stand in the vampire bat guano, which just to let you know, like vampire bat guano is like tar. It's like thick and black and smells like ammonia and it's slick. It's not great. So he has to stand. Oh
boy.
While I climb onto his shoulders and I'm using my tweezers to pick bat ticks off of the bat wall. Meanwhile, off of the cave wall. And meanwhile, these vampire bats, they because I have my headlight on, they are flying around, they're disturbed. And vampire bats are like not the most respectful flyers. Most bat species, when I go into a cave, they're not going to fly into me, but vampire bats do not care. So I'm over there with my tweezers trying to pick these ticks off the wall, and vampire bats are flying around, hitting me in my head. I'm standing on someone's shoulders who's standing in bat guano, trying not to slip and fall. Meanwhile, this is all occurring within a like poorly constructed tunnel underneath an unexcavated temple that was built thousands of years ago, and we're all just hoping nothing happens.
Oh,
it was all fine.
And you've got your tweezers pulling ticks off of a cave wall.
Yeah.
And but it worked out. You didn't end up like
no
face first.
It worked great. I got so many samples. No one fell in bat guano, and everyone was okay.
See, that is the testament of a true expert. Two true experts right there. You can balance in bat guano, get hit in the face by vampire bats, and you still get the specimens.
Yeah.
That's just brilliant. Okay, let's see here. Lots of questions coming in. This is amazing. This is great. We might not be able to stop at 8 o'clock tonight. Since you look at parasites on bats, have you found any information that may relate to the Ebola virus or other viruses?
So
sounds like specifically like zoonotic type diseases.
Yeah, so I have only ever worked on the bats in the neotropics, so those ones found in North America, Central America, and South America. Ebola virus has never been detected in any wildlife outside of Africa. And so I've never detected any Ebola in any of the bats that I study. But zoonotic pathogens. So one of the bacteria that I study in bat flies is the genus of bacteria called Bartonella. The Bartonella that's associated with bats is not disease causing in humans, but other members of the same genus cause things like cat scratch fever. A different species of Bartonella causes trench fever. So none of the bacteria that I've worked on in neotropical bats are zoonotic, but they are closely related to some zoonotic pathogens. Just generally, though, if you encounter a bat in your house or something, you should treat it with extreme care, just like every other wild animal, because some of the pathogens that bats have can be fatal to humans, and you just want to be careful.
Excellent. All right. What kind of changes have you found in the bat tick population from the habitat loss?
Yeah, so one of the things that I'm actually working on right now, and I haven't figured out what's going on yet, is that, so in this place in Belize that I mentioned before, it's undergone a lot of deforestation over the last 10 years. So it used to be one continuous chunk of jungle that was most recently cut down by the Maya thousands of years ago, but is now being cut down at a very rapid rate for agriculture. As that has progressed, we've noticed that the bat fly population has declined and even been extirpated. So that means it's gone extinct within this location. While the bat tick population hasn't been affected at all. So we're still teasing apart what factors of the environment might have influenced the bat tick population growth while the bat flies experienced an extirpation. But that's one of the things I'm working on.
Stay tuned, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. A question from my moderator.
Oh.
Hey, moderator. Thanks for your help out there. Okay. It's a long one. I think I got the gist of it, though. If you see changes in concentrations of parasites, does that give you an indication of what of how these ecological systems, these ecosystems could be changing themselves? Are bat ticks, for example, indicators of big ecological changes?
Well, that's a fantastic question. And the answer is we just don't know yet. That's one of the things we are hypothesizing that insect parasites or arthropod parasites like bat flies and bat ticks might be sort of the frontline species that get lost before some of the more charismatic species like bats begin to be affected. But we're just not sure about that yet. We just simply don't know yet.
There you go. Thanks, Eric. All right. Anna wants to know, do bats or any animals further down the food chain experience benefits from having bat flies, kind of like the crickets and fish you talked about?
Well, yes. So bat flies don't seem, we can't seem to detect any sort of specific detriment of bats having bat flies. So they don't cause, this specific parasite doesn't seem to cause any animal to die. So it doesn't impact nutrient cycling in a community like those horsehair worms did. But just based on the research I'm doing on microbes, it seems like having bat flies with certain bacterial communities may make a community of bats less susceptible to certain microparasites like malaria, if we're counting malaria as a parasite. So yeah, it's the interactions become a little more complex when the interaction between the parasite and the host is less definitive.
All right. Jesse Dillard is asking, who would be the target audience? Oh, good question. Who would be the target audience that should be informed and working on the conservation of parasites that would be the most beneficial to get progress?
Yeah, well, right now, we're like parasitologists are approaching this in a multi-pronged way so that we get the most effective response possible. The first prong is by encouraging parasitologists and conservationists, so scientific experts, to work together on parasite conservation. And this involves doing much more research on parasite biodiversity. The other prongs include getting non-experts involved in and interested in parasite conservation, so that the way we talk about parasites in schools starts changing. We start encouraging more of our young students to pursue parasite or parasitology careers. And we start to advocate for parasite conservation when conservation funding or conservation recommendations are made at the policy level. So if you feel like you fit into one of those prongs, if you're a teacher or if you're someone who's just interested in conservation, helping parasitologists conserve parasites can be as simple as talking to your friends about how cool parasites are, or spending a little bit more time finding out more about parasites that might interest you, or volunteering at a natural history collection. The other things, as soon as the other prongs start to catch up to where you are, there's going to be a lot more opportunities for you to directly contribute to parasite conservation.
I'm thinking, like, is there a parasite t-shirt I could go buy? But
oh my gosh, that's such a good idea, Chris.
I'm a state government employee. I can't tell people to go buy things. So
yeah,
I can't sell t-shirts for you, but I would probably be willing to go
if
find a
someone
pair.
Listening is like very into designing t-shirts.
It's like, I love parasites right there. Okay. How did you find out that parasites were going to be your line of study and work?
Yeah, by accident. So
That's how I got this job too.
I started, undergrad, not really thinking about science as a career at all, simply because I didn't know that it was a career. I started volunteering at a natural history collection, and that got me interested in mammals. So I decided that I wanted to study mammals for my master's degree. And when I was pitching projects to my master's thesis advisor, he said, "Hey, it sounds like you actually want to study parasite host coevolution." And I said, "Oh, okay. Let me learn more about that." And the way I actually got into bats and bat flies is he said, "Well, there's this really interesting system of gophers and lice in Louisiana that you can go study, or I have this other project that you can work on bats and their blood feeding flies in the Bahamas." And I said, "I'll take the Bahamas." And so
Yeah.
I've been working on bats and bat flies ever since.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, let me see here. Where did my questions go? Do you need special inoculations to work with bats? I guess you're traveling abroad, so that's
Yeah,
one.
and I am vaccinated against rabies. That's a vaccination that I get pretty frequently, actually. So yes, I do have special vaccinations to work with bats. I also have 10 years of experience handling bats. I have specialized equipment for handling bats. So you should, if you encounter a bat, you should absolutely not handle it.
A question about working with bats and some of the tools you use. This user wants to know if red lights on your headlamp is better, kind of like working with sea turtles.
Oh yeah, that's a really wonderful question. Well, I guess I haven't like really empirically tested this, but maybe I should. My red light on my headlamp is not as bright as my white light, and I need the bright white light to find the bat flies in the fur. Because bat flies, the species of bat flies that I study are actually smaller than a fruit fly. And so if you can imagine looking through a sea of fur to find something smaller than a fruit fly, a bright light is very helpful. But it would be interesting to see, like maybe I can find them using a red light and not disturb the bats as much. That's a great suggestion.
There you go. There you go. Okay, let's see here. Kevin with a good one. Where would be a good place to find parasite classroom resources for teachers, especially middle school students?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question, Kevin. So I'm actually a volunteer with a wonderful nonprofit called sciall.org. We are a group of volunteer scientists who put together materials for people to learn more about science, including parasites. So one of those things that we work on is putting together materials for classroom teachers. And we're actually still in the beginning stages of developing our curriculum materials. So if you contact us through our website, sciall.org, there's a form that teachers can fill out. We can actually tailor our content to your specific needs in your specific classroom. But if you're just someone who wants to get more contact with scientists from different ranges of fields, including marine biologists to astrophysicists, sciall.org is a great place for you to just interface with scientists, see what they're doing, and get the more human side of science.
There we go. Excellent. Everybody, I grabbed the link for sciall.org and I put it in the chat for you. And as soon as we get done here, I'll add the information to the description of the video here on YouTube. Of course, the link for this video will stay active, so you could use the same link, come back to the museum's YouTube channel and access this talk and lots of other cool talks too, but access this one and have this information at your fingertips too. Last question that's here on my list, since it looks like I've got just a few seconds to get it in. You mentioned parasite coevolution, and I didn't want to miss this question. Can you talk a little bit about how much your work involves expanding our knowledge of parasite evolution?
Yeah, I see my work intricately linked with our understanding of parasite evolution. specifically because a lot of parasites rely on bacteria. So for example, blood-feeding parasites generally don't get enough B vitamins from their diet. Blood is actually very deficient in B vitamins, which is, an odd fact. But parasites that feed solely on blood don't get enough of it. So they have to rely on bacteria to provision that missing vitamin from their diet. By understanding the way that those relationships occur between parasites and their bacteria, it will help us understand how a blood feeding lifestyle arises. So how does a parasitic lifestyle arise?
There you go. That's the whole thing in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And such a great bow to the conversation too. Right? Like you're fabulous. This was great.
That's what I'm trying to say. I had a wonderful time. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being on the show. Everybody, again, the information for scial.org, I dropped the link in the chat. Go ahead and click it and then bookmark it. But also, if you forget to do that or can't right now, you can come back and check out the show notes in just a few minutes. And I'll have all of the information there put into the notes so that you can access it as well. I'll remind everybody, make sure you're following the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences on social media too. We have a lot of cool resources available to you and everybody else out there on our site, naturalsciences.org. And if you're following us on social media, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as @Natural on all three. We made it easy for you. So give the museum a follow. Dr. Speer, everybody in the chat right now is dropping like clapping hands and talking about how much they enjoyed hearing from you and hearing about your work and learning about parasites. And we're all going to march out into the world now and go save the parasites.
Oh, you guys are making me so happy.
Everybody, I'll remind you, hey, we'll be here next Thursday night too. All next week, though, is a very special event at the museum, Astronomy Days. So we're going to switch gears from parasites. We're going to talk about space. That's starting the 25th all the way through the 31st. Several programs a day. Again, naturalsciences.org. Look for Astronomy Days, and you can register for all of the programs that you think you would like to participate in. They're all, as far as I know, yes, they are all free programs. You just register, get the link, and join us to learn all the best space facts from all sorts of great partners from the museum. That's all next week. Next Thursday night for Science Tonight, we'll have a very special guest, astrophysicist Dr. Katie Mack, who you might know on Twitter as Astro Katie. Katie Mack is going to be with us to talk about her latest book, The End of Everything, Astrophysically Speaking. So don't want to miss that conversation. Dr. Mack is fantastic. We've had her on the program a few times already. You might already be familiar with her. So I hope that I'll see you all again back next week for the show. Dr. Speer, thanks again for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Great job. And hey, everybody, take care, stay safe. We'll see you again next time. Good night, everybody.